Call me elitist if you want, accuse me of gatekeeping, but Gryphon Knight Epic is not, in my opinion, a real shmup. Instead, it's an adventure game that employs shmup mechanics. Something that doesn't in any way make it a bad game, but which will obviously affect how I think about it when considering whether or not to recommend it to shmup fans. Now, way back in 2015, Cyber Rhino Studios, who kindly supplied me with my copy of the game, turned to Kickstarter to get Gryphon Knight funded, and looking back at the details of that campaign is quite revealing. Gryphon Knight, the page declares, is inspired by games like Mega Man, Ghouls and Ghosts and Lords of Thunder. I probably don't have to tell you that 2 out of those 3 are not shmups, and that really shows with there being several large and noticeable departures from any of the more common shmup formulas. First of all, despite a bizarre critic review on Metacritic claiming it's overly short, the reality is it's not just long for a shmup, it's incredibly long. Even sailing through the game on easy, a complete playthrough is like to take you about 2 full hours, making it 4 to 6 times longer than most arcade shmups, and that's before you take into account the extra time it would take to properly beat on normal or above, since that will most likely involve actually dying and replaying stages. Secondly, story plays an absolutely central role, with extended dialogues between our heroic Gryphon-riding knight Sir Oliver and both his former companions in battle as well as all the mid-bosses. This is on top of several cutscenes inserted before, after and during the game. Thirdly, we have the element of exploration the game encourages. This is not as simple as blasting a hidden spot to reveal a special bonus item. It involves opening up hidden pathways and then backtracking to find entrances and moving completely out of the main stage route to discover the secrets contained within. On a related note, a 4th major difference between this and a shmup is the occasional puzzle solving players are asked to take part in. The most extreme example sees you tasked with rotating multiple cogs in a room empty of enemies, then backtracking to mix and match coloured potions in a separate room to open a route forward. That backtracking, of course, is another very un-shmup-like mechanic. I've done several dozen shmup reviews by now, and I don't think I've ever used the word backtracking until now. Finally, we have the almost RPG-like system of buying potions, squires and weapon upgrades in between stage shops, and essentially pausing play to access an options wheel and equip the relevant items in the middle of gameplay. Now, none of this is done in ignorance. As mentioned, the Kickstarter did not say we're creating a kick-ass arcade shmup. It said we're creating a game inspired 1/3 by shmups and 2/3 by action-adventure games, and that is exactly how Gryphon Knight plays. As for that shmup gameplay, you do indeed pilot Sir Oliver and his Gryphon like you would in any other horizontal shmup. Although in Gryphon Knight's case you can both base and fire in either direction, as well as, more unusually, move the scroll direction either way too. This is done not by Death Smile style using one button to shoot left and one to shoot right, but by switching your character and the whole direction of play with one button and firing with a different one. You start off with just Sir Oliver's crossbow, but can quickly add extra shots by buying and equipping different squires, although many squires have other non-shot related effects. And you use a variety of special shots by defeating stage end bosses and collecting their weapons, each of which can be further leveled up in the shop. A 4th button is used to deploy a potion, and these potions can be anything from bombs to health refills. An odd system in a shmup, since unless you happen to already have a bomb equipped, in order to use one, you need to enter a menu, equip the bomb, return to normal gameplay, then unleash the blast. There are a variety of unique enemies, and they do mix up their attack patterns, making each stage feel very different. I'd say the mid-boss fights are probably the most interesting parts of the game, with some unusual mechanics and patterns to learn, but for the most part taking down the enemies and bosses is all solid if unspectacular fun. Again, in these attacks however, we do see another departure from usual shmup form, with lots of arcing arrow shots or globules of poison lobbed on unusual for a shmup trajectories. There's also far more ground-based enemies than we usually see, with many of them running and leaping in fashions more akin to the movements found in a platformer than a shmup. You will most likely take a lot of hits from such attacks, but that's actually okay since Gryphon Knight employs a health bar that can take several hits and be replenished multiple times per stage by either collecting green health gems or using your stock of potions. This generosity shows the game basically expects you to take multiple hits, heal, get hit, heal, etc. Something again we don't usually find in a good shmup. The game features 7 main stages for you to unleash your various party tricks upon, followed by an 8-stage boss rush and final boss encounter, although I don't think it would be an exaggeration to say there are actually double that number of stages, as each one features a decent battle with a mid-boss followed by a scenery change and another stage-length run to reach the actual boss. There are a lot of set pieces in these stages, with one seeing you ascend a tall tower and another tasking you with dodging axe and hammer swings from suits of armour in the background. A rather frustrating task given the 2D nature of the game, but the isometric swing of those weapons. There are also the aforementioned hidden spots, with each stage containing a power-up granting gem to find, and often some coin-stuffed caverns or secret rooms for good measure too. These stages and their scenery are probably the most standout part of Gryphon Knight. Each is wholly unique and full of character and animation. You'll fly through burning villages, forests with scuttling animals, and tropical coves leading to pirate hideaways stuffed with treasure. Each stage has its own host of fitting and characterful enemies, and visually the game is endlessly charming and impressive. Which makes it all the more strange that the story is the exact opposite. Anyone viewing the action and characters would probably expect a jovial, perhaps slightly silly tale with pun-filled dialogue and a likeably roguish cast of characters. Instead, despite the story starting with Sir Oliver setting out to buy some food, a frivolous premise which would seem to indicate a lack of seriousness, the plot is in fact played almost entirely straight. This is unfortunate for 2 reasons. 1, it's a mismatch with the visual style, and 2, if you're going to have a serious plot, you need to have strong writing. And as the weak opening premise shows, that is entirely absent in the writing in Gryphon Knight. Others may feel differently about this aspect, of course, and such people will be in luck, as not only are there a lot of conversations and story moments, there is also a very extensive compendium featuring the backstories of all the major characters and descriptions of the world and its various inhabitants. Mercifully for me, however, the compendium is entirely optional and all dialogue is skippable, and this is handy not just for players on a 2nd or 3rd playthrough, but in my case someone on their 1st, as I often skip these boring conversations due to an almost total absence of interest in any of the characters. Speaking of subsequent playthroughs, most shmups are built around being replayed. Gryphon Knight is not. This became clear to me very early on as I started considering how to gather footage for a review. My usual technique is to play and replay a game freely until I have the hang of it and some idea of what I'd like to say about it, before then replaying it more times to capture footage and refine my thoughts. In Gryphon Knight's case, however, the thought of having to replay the whole thing to capture footage from each stage was a most unappetizing one. Now that is not necessarily a terrible thing. In very few games, other than shmups, do I want to immediately start again after finishing. Maybe one day down the line, sure, but not right away. And that was how I felt about Gryphon Knight. It wasn't that I wasn't enjoying myself, but more that the stages and game do not seem to be designed with that instant and constant replayability in mind. A big reason for that is the aforementioned backtracking, which, when coupled with the slow scroll speed, all too often leads to instances of you drifting through empty terrain, just waiting to get back to an earlier trapdoor or hidden cave. Needless to say, this sort of gameplay is not what I come to a shmup for. Further slowness comes in the form of shopping, with oddly long load times going between menus and the inability to jump directly between the 2 shops. Another oddity with the game is that exiting to the Switch's home screen does not pause the game, and returning to play will find you having drift into, if you're lucky, a wall, or if you're unlucky, a pack of enemies and a game over. So as you can probably tell, Gryphon Knight is rather lacking in the elements and characteristics that make a good shmup. But, and I think this is a key point, it's not designed to be a good shmup. It is, as mentioned at the top of the review, an action-adventure game with shmup combat, which makes it damn hard for me to assess. In the end, however, I think I have to do so on its merits as a shmup, and despite its pretty visuals, variety, and if you like that sort of thing, extensive world building, it doesn't really cut it in the gameplay department. I'd still give it a respectable 6.5 out of 10, but it's not something I'd recommend to any hardcore shmup fans. Anyone who can tolerate the stripping away of the arcade formula in exchange for the addition of mixed elements from other genres may well find more to like here. Let us know how you feel about this one if you played it. I'm sure it'll be able to charm a significant number of people, as it's an undoubtedly professional and deliberately crafted game, if not, elitist alert, a real shmup. Anyway, thank you as ever for watching. I hope to see you next time. Cheers.